A woman without a substantial dowry, particularly among the upper classes, would have had a hard time being matched, which is why the investment scheme that the Florentine government came up with in 1425 appealed to many cash-strapped families. In order to fund Florence's war against Milan, Florentine leaders created a sort of public investment firm called the Monte delle Doti, in which fathers could deposit 100 florins, which over the course of 7.5 years would mature to 250 florins, and 500 florins if left in the Monte for 15 years. It therefore behooved fathers to set up this sort of dowry insurance for their daughters as soon as they were born, though in practice not everyone did, as child mortality was high, and it is entirely possible that the girl would not make it the 15 years to meet her potential husband. Not all girls were married off. Younger or, let's say, less marketable daughters were often sent to nunneries, where with a far more modest sum the families could set them up within a religious order, which was a very honorable arrangement in the eyes of Florentine society for both the girl and her family, and one which helped preserve the family's fortune. Yet, not all women, certainly, were without influence, relegated to the household to look after their charges, or to nunneries. In particular, elite and noble women could have considerable influence on society through their patronage of the arts or their participation in, let's say, political machinations. Isabella d'Este attracted a retinue of scholars, artists, and musicians to her court in Mantua, and had ruling power of the city, while her husband was held prisoner in Venice. Unlike many women, even elite women, she had been given a classical education, and was well versed in Greek and Latin, and knew her Virgil well. She exceeded Castiglione's view of the ideal woman by getting directly involved in the political affairs of Mantua, negotiating with other Italian and foreign rulers, and running her city, quite frankly, much better than her husband had, to his great embarrassment. Likewise, Catherine de' Medici, daughter of Lorenzo II and wife to the French king Henry II, was a great patroness of the arts, and out of necessity she became a political player in France's affairs. Her three sons all became kings of France, and as regent, or through her influence over her sons, she came to have significant political influence in France. She was an avid collector of artwork, and her support of artists such as Jean and Francois Clouet made possible the very height of portrait painting in the late French Renaissance. Closer to home, the wife of Cosimo Primo de' Medici, that's the first Grand Duke, Eleonora of Toledo, was married to Cosimo in 1539. She was attractive, certainly, and from a powerful family, and as the mother of a very large brood of children, she assured the Medici succession. So she was really the key to the success of the Medici dynasty in Florence. But beyond her qualities as a mother and aristocratic woman, she had a sharp mind and directed official affairs while her husband was absent. Though Florentines were initially suspicious of her, she was a foreigner, she won them over in a bit of 16th century hearts and minds campaign by donating generously to the poor and through her patronage of the arts. But let's change focus from the highest to the lowest position a woman could hold in a well to do household, never forgetting that upper middling and upper class Florentine households would also include domestic servants and often slaves, who would have been brought inland via the port of Livorno, where in the 17th century a bagno, or a sort of prison, was built to house the galley slaves who rode on the Grand Duke's ships, his fleet, his pirate fleet, the Cavalieri di Santo Stefano, privateers, I should say. As you see here, there's a statue, a famous statue in Livorno of Ferdinando I de' Medici, standing there above the subjugated slaves, which were cast by Pietro Tacca between 1620 and 1624. It sends a powerful message, as it was and still is the first thing that visitors to the city would have seen upon disembarking in the harbor. But returning to the household slaves, these slaves could have come anywhere from, um, let's say, between the Caucasus Mountains all the way to Morocco, but they were most often Moors or North African Muslims. These girls um, frequently received the advances of the paterfamilias, whether they were welcome or not, and in certain cases wound up pregnant with his child. Um, in Florence and in other cities, children from these unfortunate unions often wound up in foundling hospitals and orphanages, which had a really appallingly high rate of child mortality. But other offsprings of these unions were luckier. They were accepted into the household and raised along with the legitimate children. The Medici themselves had in their family two well-known offspring of slave girls and the head of the house, Cosimo il Vecchio, pater patriae. He dallied with one of the slave girls in his house, and their child, Carlo, was raised up along with Piero the Gouty, who would be the father of Lorenzo the Magnificent. In later times, Alessandro de' Medici, who was the last Medici to rule Florence from Lorenzo's line, um, was known as the Moor because he had a very dark complexion and dark hair, and he is thought to have been the child of Giulio de' Medici, who later became Pope Clement VII, and an African slave girl whom the historian Christopher Hibbert has identified as Simonetta da Collevecchio. Um, Publicly, however, the Florentines were led to believe that he was the son of Lorenzo II de' Medici, which would make him the grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent.